Today I want to talk to you about the Show Empire. Now, the Show Empire is by far the oldest of the four nations. It was actually founded very soon after Year Zero. What happened, and I've talked about this a bit in my economics video, but for a brief reminder, after Year Zero, people had no idea who or what or basically anything. They could function in an everyday facet, but they didn't have things like skills, understanding of who or what they were. They didn't know who family were. They didn't know who friends were, and all sorts of horrible things like that. They were eased through this transition by a few other individuals, but the long and the short of it is they were kind of on their own. It was like a new society just being etch-a-sketched all of a sudden. The Burun were very naturally alpha dominant personality by nature. This is something I've tried to emphasize several times because it's a shading. Most people, when they hear of someone who is arrogant, they think of someone who's printing and preening and running around, being a little Hollywood about it, being a little too overt and obvious. The Burun are definitely arrogant, but they're arrogant. It's more accurate to say that they are arrogant, leaning towards confident. A Burun is far more likely to simply take control or take command of a situation because they have that kind of personality. They think they know what's going on and they think they know how to do it best. And they will challenge people who challenge them in return. Sometimes a Burun will step down, say, okay, maybe you've got the right of this. But for the most part, the Burun just step up and take charge without having to be asked to. Very active, very proactive, I should say. So the Burun got together, they founded the first economies, and they founded the first nation, the Show Empire. Now, the Show Empire consists of several districts. Or no, regions? Shit. I have so many different terms. There's the states of the Confederacy, there's the regions of the Republic, and there's the provinces of the kingdom. I actually don't remember. Give me just a moment. I have my notes. I just need to remember what the term is, so I use the proper term. This is one of the downsides of having such a massive, expansive setting, is occasionally you forget details, and details are important. At least I think they are. Okay. The Lord of the, or no, the Counts. Here we go. Of the, it doesn't say. It doesn't say. I don't know what they're called. There's each of the areas. We'll just go with that. How's that sound? Each of the areas. God, I'm terrible. There's a term for that. I just can't think of what it is off the top of my head. Those are, let's see. We've got Hibiento, Maoi, Shushi, or Shaoxi, I should say, Sawato, and the much more recent Yanshi, which is separate. And Baishi, excuse me. I forgot about Baishi. Each of these corresponds to a geographical thing purely. Like, for example, Baishi, I'm actually staring at my map right now. Baishi is completely surrounded by mountains. Maoi is down on the fertile coast. Hibiento is entirely this peninsula and the trade hubs thereof. Shaoxi is the massive expanse that covers the thrush. Excuse me, I'm stuttering now. I'm so tired. Sawato is the swamplands around the whole swamp area there. And of course, Yanshi is the more recent thing. I'll talk about that later. I guess I can talk about Yanshi now, real quick. Yanshi is the recent position because what happened was about 30-ish years ago, a group calling themselves the Tumarok just kind of showed up and won and conquered a gargantuan chunk of the territory. It's one of the most important elements of the entire setting, this attack by this outside force. And they conquered this area now known as the Dry Reach Zone, named for one of the cities that used to exist within. It's a huge chunk of territory, but there used to be a lot of show land that used to be within there. The show, the Neveri, and the Alluvians, with the help of the Osteth, have all kind of joined forces. So there's these cities that are basically exist as border defense on the edge of the Dry Reach Zone, which is kind of a laughable concept because if the Tumarok ever decided to advance, they'd win. Anyways, Yanshi is the show's contribution to that. So the Burun founded this empire on a very simple precept. Everyone has their place in society. It's very caste-based. Not as completely family-locked as most castes are, so much as racially locked. If you are a Burun, you are someone who should be at the top. You should be a leader, a count, a magnate, head of a company, head of an organization, or indeed the emperor. There's never been an emperor of the Show Empire who has not been a Burun, and there's never been a count who has not been a Burun until very recently. If you are a Moorsman, you should be someone who fills out the bulk of making a society work. I use the term workers, but I mean in every sense of the word. I don't just mean people working with their hands and lifting stuff. I also mean the people doing the paperwork and the filing and the shop clerks, basically the overall middle class of existence. The Sclavi are the arm of the show empire. They are the ones who keep things militarily in order. They actually form the bulk of the military of the show empire. They are almost every aspect of policing or guarding or anything like that. You're going to see a Sclavi in that position. There's actually an old sermon which is still used to this day in schools in the show empire. The Burun form the head. It is the smallest part of the empire, but the most crucial. The Moorsmen form the body, which refers to this area here, of course, the torso. The Moorsmen are the core heart of the empire. They are what keeps us beating. The Sclavi are the arms. They are what defend us from anything that would try to hurt us. And it's intended, at least in universe, by the people who propagate this, to be a positive thing. And indeed, there are plenty of Burun, Moorsmen, and Sclavi who take their roles with pride. So this is a caste-based system, but it's not necessarily an oppressive caste-based system, if you understand what I mean. Now, I'm not saying there isn't oppression, and indeed several people think that this kind of traditional mindset just doesn't work anymore, that it certainly worked once upon a time when the Show Empire was founded, and when everyone was in desperate need of order. But now we've moved past that, and some people think that the Empire should move as well, should adapt to the new era and the new society. The Empire doesn't think that way. It has actually led to a situation which is actively happening right now in the Show Empire. There is a civil war, and I put that in quote unquote because there's been no fighting so far because of the way how show culture works. I'll talk about that in a minute. But there has been a polite civil war with two groups, the traditionalists and the alterationists. Now, the traditionalists, they say everything has been working. Everything has always worked. There's no need to change it. Keep in mind, this is like a 350-year-old organization, which I don't mean to spoil too much, but basically makes it the longest standing organization on Primus ever. So they've been going this for a while, and it's worked for a long time. The alterationists say, no, times are changing. We don't need to be rigidly adherent to this thing. We're not saying we should go into anarchy. That would be wrong. But we should say that we should no longer be limited in what we can accomplish. And the alterationists have been slowly growing in influence over the last several decades. They were very much pushed by the Tumarok attack. That was actually one of the main impetuses for the alterationists to become a movement. If something like that can happen, what else can happen? Nobody saw the Tumarok attack coming. They literally just attacked. They had never heard of these people before, never seen them before, and they came in out of nowhere and they won. What else is lurking out there? What else do we have to deal with? So the alterationists believe the Empire does need to move forward and does need to reform its government to be able to adapt and be more fluid with regards to these situations, to be proactive rather than reactive. It is worth noting that in the mass evacuation of the Dry Reach Zone, more casualties happened on the show side of things than the other nations. So let's talk about that cultural mindset. I already kind of talked about the caste-based system, but there's another aspect of culture, and it goes for all three races. It's just show culture, regardless of which race you are. And that is the necessity of appearances. This is kind of hard to talk about without really going into tons of detail, so I'm going to try my best to summarize. If you are a wealthy businessman in the show, and you give lots of money to the poor and take care of lots of people, then you are perceived as being a positive influence. You're perceived as being a good person, a philanthropist, if you will. Make sense? Now, the way the show culture works is how you're perceived is how you are. In other words, if you are faking all of that, people will still treat you as if you actually are all that. But the reverse is also true. If someone successfully does a smear campaign on you and ruins your reputation, it doesn't matter if you're still giving all that money away. You are now perceived as someone who is, deranged or touched or corrupted or whatever, and therefore you are treated as if you actually are that. And this is a very fluid system. So perception means everything in show culture. This has led to some interesting party reactions and some wonderful politics. For example, this is long since passed, so I can give full details on this without just spoiling. At one point in time, the party was propositioned by a show magnate. They were basically saying, hey, I want you to come and I want you to steal this item of sentimental value from a fellow Burun and bring it to me. In exchange, I will do business with you. Now, what the party never found out the full details of, at least I don't think they did, maybe I'm wrong, was that the Burun he was trying to do this to was actually his niece. And he was trying to give her a lesson in how show culture worked, because she was actually a member of the Alterationists, he was a member of the Traditionalists, and this was actually supposed to be their segue into the Civil War arc of the Show Empire. But she believed that appearances didn't really necessarily matter, and so he was trying to give her a direct abject lesson, because she was well beloved by the people. But what he was going to do was he was going to steal this thing, and then he was going to give it back publicly. Say, I know you've lost this. He was going to make sure that word got out that she lost a family artifact, making her lose face crazily. She would be seen as it would be a huge mark of shame for her and her family, unless another member of her family returned it, which he was going to do, which then meant her family would be honor would be restored, but her honor would still be tainted. Make sense? So he was arranging this whole outfit and was willing to trade with these Alluvian people, which is the party, just because he wanted to teach his niece a lesson about how show culture and politics worked. Because in the show, culture and politics go hand in hand. Now, the Empire also has some very odd things that have limited its growth. For example, there's a very old rule that no building can stand taller than the Emperor's building, which is actually not that tall of a building to begin with. So they've had some serious issues with regards to construction. It's a good thing that they have been able to expand outwards so much in most of their territories, except for, of course, the Shaoxi territory itself, which I suppose I should start talking about that now. I've talked about the thrush. The thrush is a single organism that stretches across miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. Basically, most of the Shaoxi area is covered with the thrush. It is one cohesive organism, but it manifests itself in tons and tons of different plants and trees and bushes and flowers. There is tons of what would appear to be flora that are basically appendages of this organism. People have studied it over the years. They're pretty sure it itself is basically a flora. It is basically a plant. But it's obviously much more complicated than that because of the nature of how it works. For example, thrush will not naturally expand unless pushed to, but it will also not contract. Now, they've kind of learned to kind of work alongside the thrush. There are cities that literally sit on the thrush. And the way this usually works is they lay down these paving stones. There's no place where there's ground, because there is no ground. There's the thrush. It just completely covers the surface. So they lay paving stones in and just pave over a large chunk of the thrush, but they deliberately leave holes here and there where the thrush can grow up and out. And then that way, most of the thrush will grow down into the earth, but some of it will still go up, so it won't try to crack or break the city that's sitting on top of it. Make sense? The party actually made a huge crack in one of those paves once, and the thrush immediately started coming up because the thrush is very quick and very active. The thrush will also eat anything that's on it for a long period of time. There are natural animals that exist throughout the thrush. I haven't given them names yet, I'll just be honest with you. I have pictures of them in my head. Animals that have grown to coexist with the thrush because they can feed off of it, but it can also feed off of them. It does mean a weird situation in which there aren't a lot of predators on the thrush because there's nothing for them to really... The ecosystem doesn't support it, basically. But if you lay down on the thrush and just lay there for several hours, there's a pretty good chance you will be consumed by the thrush and eaten by it. It is not pleasant. I would not recommend it because it just sees you as another meal, which is unpleasant as well. This is another reason why the whole predator thing doesn't work, but I don't want to get into the ecology of that. The thrush itself does have some hallucinogenic properties, but that's mostly in the sap that kind of courses through all of its veins. So usually you don't really have much of an issue of that unless you deliberately drink it or consume it. This is funny because the party has actually had crispy critters before. That's what they're called. It's a form of specifically frying up and cooking bits of thrush and then cooking it within an oil that also contains thrush liquid in it. And when you eat it, you trip balls, basically. You completely hallucinate all over the place. It can be a very powerful hallucinogen and very popular as a result. Now, there's also one last thing I want to talk about the show. I actually don't have much to share elsewise about the show, unfortunately, because the party hasn't really done a lot there. So most of what I can only tell you is about their culture and their backing. I can't tell you much about current events because the party hasn't done anything out there yet. But what I can tell you about is that I just forgot what I was about to tell you about. Hang on. I was talking about the crispy critters and the food and the Civil War. Hang on. I've got it. I just. Oh, right. Valsenball. And there was another thing. I just had it. It was on the tip of my tongue. The crime. Okay. Valsenball and crime. So, Valsenball was invented by a Burun. Valsenball is actually a continent-wide sport, but it's biggest in the show, and it was invented in the show. Basically, the way Valsenball works, you know what? I'm not sure I want to talk about it. It's going to be. I have invented an entire sport. Basically, it's a sport that relies on weaving. Periodically, the rules of Valsenball change, and certain things accomplish certain things that they didn't previously. Like you can literally toss the actual Valsen ball into the enemy's goal and get a point for them because the rules changed. So people have to keep track of that. People have to actually go and defend. People have to go and get all these little weaving items that help them to go through it. And there's a huge market for that because unlike most real life sports, augmentation is encouraged in Valsenball. Those people go out there and they have woven hats and woven shirts and woven blankets. They're basically enchanted all to hell and back. They basically go out there with like jump boots and the ability to dash. You know, think again, Deus Ex with all the augments. They basically go out fully augmented with all this enchanted woven gear so that they can go through and accomplish their goals. It's a big sport. Lots of money cycles through it. Very, very popular. Zerial's a big fan of it. Snark hasn't quite gotten the hang of it. But it's very big. That actually originated in the show, as I mentioned. Basically, it was designed as an outlet for weaving because it was determined that weaving didn't have a lot of military applications for reasons I haven't really discussed because we haven't really talked about weaving in depth. But let's just say that it would take an arc weaver to be able to make military grade woven items. I mean, you have to be a Derricos to pull off something like that. So most weaving is more mundane. But weavers needed jobs, and there's only so many demands for lights and whatnot. So this was something that was designed to help create jobs for weavers, and it worked quite well. The other thing I want to talk about is the crime aspect. So the undermarket, which I've talked about at some detail in the past, extended across most of the continent, but only had a few small influences in the show. Due to the way the show work, external criminal influences just don't work here. They can operate, but mostly it's more like the undermarket will do deals with the local crime cartels, who will then do deals with the undermarket. But the undermarket has no real presence in the show and never has. This has actually been a problem for Zeiss and Coulson as they're trying to build up the exchange's power base. They actually made this has actually already happened as of now. They made a move into the show and they were violently rebuffed. And it's like okay, and Zeiss made what I believe to be the correct call and backed off on that. The show cartels are pretty violent, is what I'm trying to say. They will not tolerate external influence on their power. I mean, you think the rest of the show are traditionalist. You've not seen anything. The show cartels also have a lot of bitter rivalry amongst them, which goes back generations, as you might imagine. Basically, Bob upsets Jill, and so 20 years pass, and now Jill's son wants to avenge Jill on Bob. Remember this, there's this whole cultural appearance thing. So she goes back after so this son goes back after their son, who then has a grudge against them, and you can kind of see how these grudges just kind of expand over time until most of the cartels hate each other for some reason or another. So there's a lot of infighting. Most of the actual fighting, as in violence, has been happening amongst the criminal element. It's very dangerous and very deadly. I have tried to emphasize that because they don't, most of the crime in Primus is not what we really think of as crime in real life. There's some stealing, of course, and there's smuggling. That's about as severe as it gets. The undermarket itself was basically something that was required for the economy to function, and a lot of people knew that who were in charge and who weren't. The cartels down in the show, they're not required for things to function. They're violent. They're dangerous. They're closer to what you'd call actual crime. They're the kind of people who won't just steal from you. They'll mug you. They'll kill you. They'll sneak into your house and put a horse's head in your bed. That kind of a thing. They're very unpleasant, is what I'm trying to say, and very dangerous. It is funny to note that the players have interacted with these cartels more than once, actually. So that's the last thing I have to share about the show. As ever, any questions are welcome, and I guess I'll see you next time.